Hi everyone. Today we're going to be working on two activities. The first of these is molecular model activity. You should have your handout in front of you, and each person is going to need a molecular model kit that looks like this. We're going to be using these models to build different molecules and study polar and nonpolar covalent bonds. Once you get the hang of it, you may not need the models any longer, and in that case, you can go ahead and just start drawing on your own. I want to get us started all together. First of all, you'll see here in the top part of your activity that we actually have a number of different elements. We're talking about the elements that are most common for living organisms. Okay, so first let's take a look at hydrogen. Let's consider first how many bonds hydrogen can make. On your periodic table, hydrogen has one valence electron. It needs two to be happy because it only has that inner shell. So hydrogen is only going to make one bond. Oxygen, which has 6 valence electrons, needs 2 more to be satisfied. So it will make, that's right, 2 bonds. Nitrogen has 5 valence electrons. So how many bonds can it make in order to be satisfied? That's right, it can share 3. And carbon, which has 6 total electrons, 4 valence electrons, can make a total of 4 bonds. Now, one other thing that will be really helpful for you in doing this activity is to look at what kind of bond forms between each combination of these atoms that we've mentioned here. For example, a carbon-hydrogen bond. Carbon has an electronegativity of 2.5, and hydrogen has an electronegativity of 2.1. If I subtract these two, I get a total difference in electronegativity of 0.4. Take a look at your bonding spectrum. Where does this fall? That's right, that makes this a non-polar covalent bond. So now, whenever I need to evaluate this bond, I know automatically it's nonpolar. Now, let's take a look at the first example of how you're actually going to build the models. Let's look at the first example here of water. I'm going to build the water molecule. In your kit, there's a key that tells you what color each ball represents. Black, for example, represents carbon. Remember that we know that carbon can form 4 bonds, and so I will see on this ball 4 openings. Oxygen is red. Oxygen, remember, can form 2 bonds, so there are 2 openings. Hydrogen can form 1, and the blue is nitrogen. Now be careful in your kits, there are 2 different kinds of nitrogens. You want the nitrogen which only has 3 openings and can therefore form only 3 bonds. The goal of this activity is to satisfy each of these which represent a lonely electron. How do you satisfy a lonely electron? You allow it to bond with a lonely electron in another atom. Let's take water for example. In water, I have my oxygen. I need to now combine it with 2 hydrogens. In order to do so, I'm going to use one of these gray bonds here and a gray bond here and combine with my 2 oxygens here and here. So now I've made my water molecule. Now I need to draw this molecule. Now it's important that when you draw the right shape and that you label the bonds. So for example, let's go ahead and draw the water molecule. Okay. I can see that I have an oxygen and that I have 2 hydrogens coming off of it. Here's my drawing of the water molecule. Don't draw the circles, draw the actual atomic symbol that each of these is represented by. Later on in the lab, the very last step will say to go back and label each polar covalent bond. An example of how to do this is on your bonding spectrum, but let's review it here. A polar covalent bond, okay, remember, is a result of a great difference in electronegativities. We know that oxygen, which has an electronegativity of 3.5, and hydrogen has an electronegativity of 2.1. When we subtract 3.5 from 2.1, we get 1.4. That means that this is a polar covalent bond. We need to draw in a vector now for our polar covalent bond. The vector always points towards the element with the greater electronegativity. Every polar covalent bond that you draw in this lab must be labeled as such. If it's a nonpolar bond, it does not need to be labeled. Best of luck. Build. Check with a partner. If you have an open hole, that means that you have not built the model in the correct way. One last piece of advice. Let's take a look at the bottom at number 7. You'll notice that number 7 is written in a particular way. The two carbons aren't lumped together. Rather, they are separate here and here. That is an intentional thing. This is a set of building instructions. What it says is that first you're going to build your CH3. Then you're going to attach a carbon, then the hydrogen and oxygen to it. So this gives you a set way to build the molecule. Try that going forward. Again, don't be afraid to check with the person sitting next to you. And if you have questions, make sure you set up a time to see me. When you complete this activity, please turn it into the instructor, and then you can go ahead and work on the second activity for the day. Thanks, and best of luck.